I would like you to think of when you were a child and to go back to the swimming pool you were used to go, where you learned to swim, where you had fun with your friends. And I can imagine, at least that's the case for me, but I think for a lot of people, that you feel some kind of like connection with that swimming pool. That was your swimming pool, and that you feel attached with that. That is the same with the story I'm going to tell you now. In Didam, a small village with 17,000 inhabitants, there is such a swimming pool. But the continued existence of this swimming pool really is at stake as a result of large budget cuts. The municipality boards, they don't have trust in the viability anymore, and they're threatening to close it down. But the employees of this swimming pool say, we can keep it open. We just have to implement our new business plan. But even with this voice and the new business plan, still the votes were in favor of closing the swimming pool down. So what did these people do? They put up the pressure by starting a crowdfunding campaign. They raised 14,000 euros and with support of 500 people to raise funds to implement their new business plan. But what they actually did was not just raise funding, but they made visible how many people really felt like we want to keep our swimming pool. It's an important place for us. As a result of this crowdfunding campaign, and you can imagine that local media was on every highlight in this action, now it's not sure yet whether the swimming pool can stay open, because a final decision will be made about that at the end of May. But you can imagine that a couple of months ago, everyone's saying, okay, it's definitely going to close down. And now, after this campaign, it's actually much higher chance that they will keep their swimming pool. Wow. This example really shows the power of the crowd, and also how the crowd can challenge local government. And that's what my talk will be about. And also interesting is that this is an example of how civic crowdfunding is not just about the money, but it can also be a really good instrument to gain political influence. Well, first a bit about us. My name is Aster Van Tilburg, and I work for Voor Je Buurt. And Voor Je Buurt is, I think, the main civic crowdfunding platform in the Netherlands. And we think this development of people using crowdfunding as a political instrument is really interesting. It's also something, I think, in the Netherlands at least, very recent. Because in the last couple of months, we had 6 of these kind of political campaigns, and none before that. And to put it in perspective, Voor Je Buurt was launched in January 2013. And since the start, we have over 275 campaigns, of which 80% successful. Actually, this is a bit outdated already, because we have 500 backers ahead from this number. Over 19,000 people backed a project, and with that, over 1.1 million euro was raised. Well, to make the calculation, you can see that around the average amount that is raised is around 4,500 euros. So it's not about big money. It's just about small, nice projects. During my talk, I will share my experience with how civic crowdfunding works in the Netherlands, and also how governments are more and more challenged by this power of the crowd. But luckily, it's not like governments are passive victims to an outspoken crowd. Now, we also have some really good examples of governments proactive acting on these new developments. So I will conclude with some good examples of that. But first, civic crowdfunding. Civic crowdfunding is about raising funds for projects that have like a social impact or are taking place in the public domain. And for who of you was here yesterday, yesterday was mainly about equity crowdfunding, but our platform is on donation and reward-based crowdfunding. To give an example, a group of people who raised funds to realize swings in an old petrol station. You see the model of that behind me. Or another example, people raising funds to restore a windmill that was burned down. That's the kind of projects we have on our platform. Well, you saw the 4,500 euros. You could say that like what's raised on a platform, it can be a couple of €100, it can be 40,000 euros, but that's maybe a bit of the highest you can go. So it's not really an instrument where you can build cities with. It's not a replacement for government funding. But what it is a very powerful campaign instrument. You did see it with the political campaign, but it's also a really good way to build communities. And with the projects on our platform, building communities often might be even more important than raising funds. Behind me is an example of a community house, and in order to make a community place like this, like functioning, a success, I mean, you need money for some furniture. That's what they crowdfunded for. But to make it a success, you need people who organize activities, help out, paint the walls, tell the story about it to other people. And that's what they did with the crowdfunding campaign. They built a community of these people celebrating the opening of this place. And we also did research on how civic crowdfunding contributes to community building. And actually the results were really convincing. We asked 800 backers of crowdfunding campaigns on how the campaign influenced their relationship with the project. And these were the results. 82% of the backers said, I feel more involved with the project. 55% said, I actually feel ownership. And 66% say, I will actively want to help to make this a success. So it really works to build communities. But now back to local government. I started with local governments are really challenged by the crowd organizing things. They're not really challenged by a nice community house, but we see that civic crowdfunding is really growing up, and it's about more serious and bigger projects. And you could say that, like traditionally, especially in the Netherlands, the government was acting as a gatekeeper, deciding who gets funding, who gets permission, and who can start a project. And more, you see that civic citizens just stand up and do their own thing and just walk past the gate. And to really, to fully understand this, I have to explain that in the Netherlands, in the last 60 years, we built up a very well-developed welfare state. So we get used to the fact that the government is responsible for community houses, activities for the elderly, a public garden, all things like that. And now a development is going on that, on the one hand, government is cutting the budget and is withdrawing, and on the other hand, citizens are taking up more action and do things themselves. So, but how? I will point out two ways that you can see that civic crowdfunding is really like a new challenge for local governments. First, that's an interesting one. We get used to the fact that the government is responsible for everything. And even if a government still formally isn't responsible anymore, for instance, a community house behind me that's totally like started with a group of neighbors, if something goes wrong here, the media and citizens will still see local politicians as responsible. So there's a tension going on there. The government doesn't pay for it anymore, but they're still being held responsible, so they still, like, it's easy for them to really step back and don't have a say about it. And second, that's what I started with, is that civic crowdfunding is more and more used to gain political influence. And like in the introduction, like I told you in the introduction with the swimming pool. And what's interesting there, that's if it's about political action, it's not just protesting against something. Often it's about having a positive campaign for an alternative plan. And a good example of that is this painting behind me. It's about another Dutch village, and the province had made up an infrastructural plan that would cut this village into halves. And to prevent that, they started to also start a petition, and they were writing alternative plans. But in order to make sure that the province took their alternative seriously, they had to raise funds to fund a feasibility study of their alternative plan. But of course, it was about much more than just funding. This was also about making visible how many people stood behind their alternative. And it's also, what I think is interesting about this is that by putting money where your mouth is, people are really showing commitment to an alternative. It's positive, it's about action. And I think that's really nice. That's really nice if you compare it to a lot of against campaigns where people just hang and don't do anything and don't take any responsibility. But luckily, it's not like there are a lot of governments who are doing good things with this new development of civic crowdfunding, instead of acting like a victim. And to summarize that role should be is being proactive on civic crowdfunding and use it in a way to reach goals for society. And we have, for example, really good cooperation with the Eastern District of the City of Amsterdam. And they spend a lot of effort with us in capacity building, both of citizens who want to start a crowdfunding campaign, but also in employees of the municipality who can now support local projects. And that way, it really becomes a way for citizen activation and empowerment. And they created a very lively district, because everyone, rich or poor, has the feeling, if I want to realize a project, I'm able to. And that's what civic crowdfunding here is contributing to. Another interesting way is that local governments can become a match funder. Match funding means that government or a charity fund distributes subsidies by contributing to crowdfunding campaigns. And in the Netherlands so far we have the most experience with charity funds contributing to civic crowdfunding campaigns. This is an example of that. And what they're doing is that instead of having all those procedures and months of application time, they just take a look at the crowdfunding campaigns and 2 additional questions, and they decide within a week whether or not to contribute to a civic project. Well, in London, also something interesting is going on with our colleagues at Space Hive. They started a program with the mayor. It's called the Mayor Civic Crowdfunding Program, and £20 million is available to match crowdfunding campaigns for civic projects in London. So that's really a huge impulse on stimulating civic crowdfunding, but also on making sure you spend your money on projects that have support. And I hope, like in a couple of months, that we have at least 3 local governments in the Netherlands who are starting with this as well. Not with deep budgets, but we start at like 100,000 euros, and then we're really proud of that as well. But to end up, why should you start with match funding? I mean, it's nice for the projects, but why should you do that as a funder? I will give you 5 reasons. First, I told you crowdfunding is a community building instrument. So if you stimulate people to crowdfund, you stimulate them to actively build communities. Second, often one of the criteria for a government to support a project is there support for this project. Well, if 100 people pay at least 10 euros, you can be pretty sure that there are 100 people who support this project. And third, it's a way to make transparent how you divide your subsidies. Instead of just a black box where a government spends money on, everyone can see what choices are made. And fourth, really interesting, I think, part of government policies often to put a lot of control mechanisms on how the project is executed, how the money is spent. And I think a crowd is much more capable of doing that than a government is. Because if I ask all my friends and family to support my projects, they really want to know what I'm doing with that money. So if I'm delayed, they ask me what happened. And if I spend it on something else, I'll have a problem with all my friends and family. So I won't do that. And last, I think if you have instead of spending 10,000 euros on 20 projects, you can now spend 5,000 euros on 40 projects because you stimulate them to raise funds. And that way, you can have more impact with the same budget on your city. So to conclude, civic crowdfunding is, well, it's not just about money. It's mainly a campaign instrument that can have a really big political influence, but it's always a good way to build communities. And we see, and for governments that can be challenging and new, and suddenly the crowd is really standing up, but we see more and more good examples on how a local government can act on that. And we hope to add this list of good examples and keep you posted on that. But you can also learn from that in other parts of Europe and other parts in the world. Thank you very much.